In your face, all over the place.
We're online 24/7. 24/7.
You're listening to the hottest internet station,
WLMR DB Radio. Welcome to the Veteran Hour Special. Today, the Veteran Hour Special will be a 2-hour show taking the place of the DJ Guest Show, which will begin airing again next Tuesday. Today, the host will be Bob Kern, who wrote the book, We Are Soldiers Too. The author, like veterans, like ourselves, to have a statement in the book and tell about all our time that we did on the Berlin, the Iron Curtains, and the Korea DMZ. For your facts, there was a lot of people that didn't know anything what was going on in Korea or Germany on the borders. So Bob Kern is here today to do our 2-hour special on a veteran show with host Tom Lufkin and myself, Levi Miller. So stay tuned for this very special veteran special. Welcome to the Veteran Show once again. I'm your host, one of your hosts, Levi Miller.
And I'm the other host, Tom Lucan. I'd like to welcome everybody to tonight's show, which is a kind of a special show. We're doing a 2-hour special with veteran and author Bob Kern, and Bob's the author, as some of y'all have heard before, the book series called We Were Soldiers Too. So, Bob, I'd like to welcome you to the show.
Thanks for having me back, guys. I really appreciate it. It's always a pleasure.
Anytime, Bob.
We always love having you on the show. So, I guess first question come along to ask, since it's been a few weeks since we talked, how's Book 5 coming along?
It's going to be huge. In fact, I'm glad you brought that up. We'll just open the show with this announcement right here that I think Book 5 is going to become 2 books.
Wow.
Because it's that big, which is a good thing. I'm not 100% there yet. I'll know more when I get further into it, but to give you an idea, Book 1 through 4 ran between 50,000 words and 65,000 words. Chapter 1 of Book 5 is 10,000.
Wow.
There's a lot to be told. And the volunteers have just been outstanding. I've been fortunate. All the books have had good volunteers, but this one's really got, I think, maybe up to 19, possibly even 20, if I'm able to interview the last few people that have reached out to me. So, yeah.
Really? Yeah. See, now when you did Book 3, we've had, trying to get the people to respond was hard. So,
yeah, I think we talked about, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but we talked about this
you're
a little
fine,
bit during last month. I think Book 1, my biography, sold really, really well. And I think it did so, not because it was an I Love Me book and all about Bob Kern, but I think it was because it was the first book, it was the first book that a lot of Cold War veterans had seen put out there that actually told what it was like and what we went through from start to finish. I know Mark has had his book out before then, but his was specifically about just one patrol and what the patrol went through on the DMZ, where my biography covered this naive kid going into the Army at 17, what basic training was like, how it changed me. Then over half the book was on my time in Germany, which brought back a ton of memories for guys that served over there. But we just went into real in-depth what it was like living in the 80s and the conversion to light infantry in the late 80s. And it really resonated with people, so that when I announced the sequel, I got a pretty big response from the German crowd. There were 17 volunteers because I covered half the book was Germany. But then we got to the DMZ part where I had never been, and again, we've had this discussion about the DMZ. It's a very tight, close-knit group, and so a lot of them weren't even aware that my first two books were out there. And so we got 9 volunteers. 2 of them did 2 tours, so I was able to basically cover 11 periods of the Cold War, and it came out to be a very good book about the DMZ, but mostly about the support guys and the guys working outside the DMZ. I had a couple that were inside it, but most of them were working OPs and bunkers and radio GSR places. I mean, it was just a variety of guys, but none of the patrol guys were really ready to share their stories because they just thought I was some guy trying to capitalize on other people's history. And I think people have seen now after the first 3 books that this is not about me making money. This is about writing the history of the Cold War. And I do it in a way that it really does capitalize more on the history and what we went through each individual's career. And they see that I've kept my prices down to rock bottom. I mean, you have to be a fool to think I'm making money off these books. This is really about documenting our service, and it's a project that I consider a Cold War project that we're all involved in, not just me. And that trust factor has helped tremendously in getting people to come forward because, as we talked also, I've got people already lined up. I've interviewed for this book. I've got half the people lined up for the one on the brink of the nuclear war, 1983. Of course, we'll talk a little bit later on the Ghost Walker. And I've gotten a handful, probably 9-10 people come forward now to do the Cold War at sea. So I think the confidence factor has helped a lot to bring people forward and give me enough to write these stories. So there's the long-winded answer. You know better to ask me a question. I guess that you ask it and then sit back and let Bob go.
Well, I'm just glad to see him really step up because I know book 9 when where I helped you out and it was just getting people to step up seemed really kind of hard, and so but no, I'm just glad. And now let me jump books now. How's book 4 doing, the newest one? And if people don't know, book 4 is Defending the Iron Curtain. That just came out right at Memorial Day weekend. So it's been out for 3 weeks.
It's been out, what, 3 weeks, yeah?
Yeah.
And it's not selling like I had hoped it would, but it is selling, and the other books are about, it's doing, for every 2 books I sell of the new book, book 4, I sell 1 of the other 3. So people are coming on board and buying the whole, all 4 books are selling, it tells me it's a new reader.
Yeah.
4 sells by themselves. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I've seen postings, I know you have too, but I've seen postings on Facebook. Guys are buying, 3, 4 books, or, like one guy's writing, you can tell well, I got book 1, 2, and 4. It's like, okay, yeah, you don't like the DMZ. All right, I see how you are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the same way. I've got book 1 and 2, or 1 and 3, and I can't wait for 5 to come out. So.
Yeah, I see that too.
We still got the division, but you know what? I got a story to tell you about that here in a minute that I saw just last week. But it's bringing us more exposure, probably in the veteran community, because guys really are 85% of the sales are probably coming from the veteran community right now, the Cold War veteran. It was 100%. I'm starting to get a little bit more well known in the author community on Facebook. As you've seen, I've got, 4,500 people on my friends list, and probably a third of those are authors. So I am bringing in more exposures through being active on Facebook and trying to present what we're doing to people outside our Cold War circles. And I know so are you guys. I know especially you, Tom. But others are reposting some of our stuff, which tells me that they're helping to spread the word. So I think eventually, as more, I know when they read one, they go back and read a couple more. And that's what we're after here. Because the Cold War was not about any one assignment, any one period of time, any one person. It was a cumulative thing of all of us over the years, because we all did different jobs at different locations. And I think that people are starting to show an interest in reading more than just the DMZ books and such. And we'll I know we've broken some of the barriers, because the DMZ guys and the border guys and the Germany guys, you've noticed it, Tom, they're talking a little differently to each other.
Yeah.
More respectful, instead of I'm better than you, or you didn't. There's no competition anymore. I think we've bridged that gap, and that each understands the importance of what each of them were doing. And I don't think that was there before we started talking up the books and such with people. Do you, Tom?
I agree, and I've seen that, because I know me and Harold Mason kind of talked that in the past, and of course both of us being real soldiers, we were Camp Scouts.
Me.
I had to throw that in there. I'm sorry.
Right. So now it's not DMZ versus Germany, but it's Camp Scouts against the rest of the world.
Of course, you got the U.S. Army, then you got the U.S. Cavalry.
I know. Just putting their fences up, my friend.
Oh, yes, he is. Right.
But no, what me and Harold talked about it, I've always been an advocate that people don't understand what it was like to serve in the border enough, and it's like I've said before. Of course, I'm still in my first cup of coffee, but the DMZ was more hazardous on the spot, but overall, people got to understand that the East German Czech border was actually more dangerous than the DMZ, or it could be more dangerous, or was more dangerous. I mean, it's always been kind of hard for me to find the right words for it, but DMZ, when you're out patrol there, odds were a lot higher you're going to make contact. But in Germany, when you're sitting on the East German, sitting over in Europe at that time during the Cold War, if it got hot over there, it was going to be really bad compared to what Korea would be, so it was a more dangerous time, and I think the tensions were higher along the border there than they were along the Korean border. Korean border, you had North Korea at the time, and really Russia was not a big player at the time, because Russia and China's been at odds since, the 50s?
Yeah, around by that time.
Yeah, Russia was.
It just...
Go ahead. No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
But they both present their own dangers in a lot of many ways, and and it was dangerous duties, and they were lonely duties. It just, I'm not sure the exact words how to describe it, but I think it's there, and I think there's more respect. It needs to be respect for both.
There should be. You and I, when we first discussed this, I preached to you about the importance that the German. You guys may have had the threat of direct contact every day, but in Germany, I don't think they're on the border or not. We had the threat of a nuclear bomb going off over our head every day.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
It's a different kind of stress. You couldn't see your enemy, but you knew that there's a good chance you were going to have contact with them at some point. We couldn't see our enemies, but we knew they were going to attack. Everybody believed the Soviets were going to attack. They just didn't know when. And Harold believed
I don't care which border you're on, whether you're on the DMZ or the East German Czech border. But to have what Harold Mason happened to him, he's literally scared the crap out of you. It would scare the crap out of you. Sitting in a guard tower, have a hind D just pull up right in front of you and hover. I mean, oh, geez, just the thought of that. I mean, and whether they open fire or not, just to see that flying tank pull up and stop there, it's like, what would you, that had, something like that had to really, just to see that back at that time. Hey, this ain't a Rambo movie where you see, Rambo shooting 3,000 rounds with a belt of 30 hanging off his 760 machine gun. But, it's just, something like that. And, it just, because you don't know what to expect. That hindy pulls up, it's like, oh, crap. What do you do?
Yeah.
Okay, I got my M16. I'm a big threat to that hindy. Not.
It was just, that was I'm glad that we were able to cover that in the book, and I'm so appreciative that Harold and all the guys for coming forward for this book, because even as a guy that served in Germany, I had no idea what it was like to be on the border every day. I had a fighting position on the Czech border, and that we went there once, it's covered in the book, but I didn't live it every single day. But the point is, and this is where the government is so screwed up, if you served, number one, if you served overseas, that ribbon they gave us that was the overseas service ribbon, that little pretty orange and red, and you know what I'm talking about, guys.
Oh yeah, I remember. I remember.
Thomas got it. If you got that, that meant you served somewhere overseas, and to me that should be considered hazardous. Well, you know what I mean? High risk. And I think the Korean Defense Medal should be awarded to anybody that served in Korea, and I think the Ensign Scout badge should be awarded and allowed to be worn or displayed by anybody that served in the DMZ, because those are unique awards for what you did. But I also think that there should be a German defense badge for the guys that served in Germany. But my overall goal with this series is, of course, to educate people on what it was like to serve, period, in the Cold War. Because there should not be any distinguishment by any state, federal government about when you served, because you served, and I believe that. And I don't want to take away, and I hope no one ever thinks I'm trying to take away from our guys that served in actual combat situations. I'm not trying to minimize what it was like to serve in Berlin or in the DMZ, but I think if you volunteer to serve your country, you were prepared to sacrifice.
Go ahead, Bob.
Well, I'm not sure what got caught and didn't, so I'll just, and I know you'll be editing this, but in a nutshell, the series is to teach people about the Cold War and to teach them what we all went through. I don't believe, personally, there should be any distinguishment between when a veteran served. There shouldn't be a peacetime and a wartime veteran. You're still a veteran. And I just think that by distinguishing it, you're disrespecting those that served. And I know we didn't fight in a war, but we fought our own types of wars. You guys on the DMZ, the border guys, us armored or infantry guys.
Well, and the tensions on both sides. I mean, my God, I think in the past shows we talked about, and I've talked with somebody. Well, Harold talked about a good story on, when he first got to Germany, it was alerts. You practice alerts, but what people don't realize. Okay, with the armor side of the house, as you probably know too, Bob, Korea was the same as Germany. When it came to, let's say, the tanks, with the M60s, M1s, and so on, ammo, especially for the main guns, the main weapons, was kept uploaded on the vehicles at all times. With the vehicles sitting in the motor pools, right? Because you had to be ready to go to war. I mean, overseas, and again, Korea, I believe, was the same as Germany. You didn't have one central AHA, let's say like a Fort Riley or Fort Polk or whatever. You got the AHA where all the ammo is stored. So you go to the range, you go there and pick it up. No. Overseas, like Germany and Korea, the ammo was stored there. In many cases, each unit had its own AHA, or sometimes even in the motor pools, or it all varied. But you had to have the ammo for ready access to go.
Yeah.
It was so, and, you had to be ready to go to war on the spot. States, okay, well, we got to deploy them here, those railhead them off, a week later you're finally shipping out or whatever, because you had to railhead your vehicles out. And, overseas, you're, within minutes of danger.
Yeah.
And so, and especially on both sides, I mean, and you had to be ready to go. I mean, so like with the vehicles, for example, using tanks or Bradleys or whatever, if you went the gunner or in the field, usually we had to download the ammo and load them up and lock them up in connexes while in the field, so when they accidentally fire it off. Somebody don't load up blanks over, whatever, or fire the wrong ammo on the tank because you don't have 120 millimeter blanks to go in the main gun. That's a whole different baby there with the Hoffman device and that. But still, you pulled your ammo off the main gun rounds and that was all stored on the vehicles. And Korea was the same way. You're ready to go, just like Germany was, and but that's how just one of the differences compared to stateside there. But the alert went off. Yeah, most of the time, okay, it's bogus, but you don't know. It's like
and you weren't supposed to know, right? And, they didn't want you to know for a reason, so that you treated every alert like it was the real thing. If you knew they were just practice, you would treat it as practice, and then you would treat the real one as practice because that's how you were used to doing it. It's like, sports teams practice through repetition so things become instinct. Well, alert for the same concept. Every alert was treated as the real thing by upper command because they wanted you to react like it was the real thing. And that's what won the Cold War. I mean, they had their spies. They knew how ready we were. They saw us do these rollouts and all over the foreign countries. So, if you want Bob's opinion, those alerts and the way we trained and patrolled and the things we did in Korea and Germany and played a huge part in winning the Cold War. And
Oh, yeah.
let's bring the
Yeah.
stateside guys and give them their fair shit too. I mean, things like Reforger and Team Spirit, those weren't done from a casual deployment. Those were key training exercises that, for our NATO mission, that the units were alerted and sent overseas. In Germany, for example, they shipped the whole point was to prove that they could get there within their 4-day window. And so when they were scheduled for Reforger, they knew it was their rotation and they could go on, but they didn't know when. They alerted them, and they had feet in the ground and in vehicles. They kept the vehicles overseas for the stateside units back then.
Composites.
Yeah. In fact, we talk about that in one of the books, the last one, the border one, how they would raid these sites for parts to keep the units up, because the Vietnam War was taking all the supplies, and so our vehicles were falling apart in Germany, and I forget whose store it was. I think maybe Still Drobny's, but they actually came up with the plan to fly into these sites where they were the equipment was stocked and the vehicles for stateside units, and they'd leave their old part on the hood and pull the new part off these standby vehicles to keep their units up and running. But the point is, everything's stockpiled for the States, so Reforger and Team Spirit was the same way when they deployed the 25th, and I forget the other units that were involved in that. They treated it like a real-time situation to show the North Koreans and the world how quickly we could get our forces to back you guys up, because you were going to be dead anyway, just like we would have been.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Speed bump, as everybody calls it.
Yeah, that's what we were.
We were all a speed bump. We just all had a little bit different life expectancies. Some of us speed bumps were rolling speed bumps. Mine was to be there in 4 hours from the Rock to be the next bump they hit after they rolled over the border. So, but yeah, there's a lot of awareness for everybody that these books need to bring out. Again, some of us, the overseas guys, have serious jobs to do, but we can't forget the support guys stateside too. Just because you didn't leave Fort Sills didn't mean you didn't have an important role during the Cold War, just like you don't have an important role now. I mean, you're the one that sent us our sleeping bags and our cold weather gear, and whatever logistics we needed. But used to be at Fort Bend Harrison where we got paid out of. And so these guys in Indianapolis may not have ever even been issued guns, but could we have done what we did without them? Who would have worked for free?
Well,
so
especially during the Cold War, when you had a massive military, and you had 40,000 plus troops deployed in Korea, all through Europe. We had over 400,000, 500,000 through there, and then you get troops in Japan, Panama, Alaska, Hawaii. And it's not like you just throw the stuff in the back of a truck, a deuce and a half or 5 ton, and just drive it down the road and drop it off. I mean, the massive amount of supplies and even they had to be continuously, shipped. I think during World War II is when the American military learned how to supply its units and so forth. And they became precise then when you had to basically keep two massive militaries going on two sides of the world. You had over in Europe, then you had over in the Pacific. And the U.S. has kind of perfected how to take care of, two war fronts. People say you can't fight two fronts. What we were doing in World War II, we were fighting two massive fronts, and we were the main supplier of equipment, not only for our troops, but for many other countries during World War II. So I think we perfected the supply line, as you could call it, for both, back then, and to this day we still can. So, by the way, I had to iterate, Bob. I think they still did in the '80s. Steal parts off the pampas. The pampas sites is what they call them, where the go-to-war equipment was. And, my experience in Germany's only been reforgers. And I remember in '86 when we went over there, I was with the first ID then, and we deployed over there for a certain Sentinel. And my 113 we drew out was missing 2 engine panels.
Yep.
So we took MRE
requisition on it.
I think we did. We never did see them. We had to use them. See, I guess we were MREs by then. We had to use MRE boxes to cover up because it was missing a tube back there by the TC seat. If you're familiar with the 113, the driver's panel was there, but it was missing the other two. And so we put covers on them, more so to keep the noise down. Carbon monoxide, well, you always had hatches open. You had to take a chance with the heaters on those vehicles, or you wouldn't take a chance because they put off carbon monoxide. So, but the engine, just to keep the racket down some, we took MRE boxes and covered the panels.
Yep.
So, but yeah, the vehicles we got, of course, mine had a fan tower in there that was, it was contaminated oil. So we kept putting, draining it out and filling it up with oil through reforger. So, but yeah.
There's they sit there idle for so long that it's not the best of situations either, but at least it was faster to put guys in those than it was, and to fly them to it than to try to railhead them, get them on a boat. I mean, there's no way we could have met our GDP missions and our commitments to NATO if we'd have had to bring our own vehicles from the stateside. And so,
oh my God, just deploying one division is a logistic nightmare, and all the vehicles that go with it. One, of course, back then, even our mechanized were really armored divisions. And so, and I say that because, like, when I was first ID, 84, 87, at Fort Riley, we had 2 brigades there, and we had the forward third in Germany. And the 2 brigades, we were a mechanized infantry division. I never figured that out when you got 1 infantry battalion for 2 armored battalions. That sounds armored division to me, don't it?
Yeah.
Armored task force. So.
But we were a heavy armor military back then too.
Oh yeah.
So that's just how they built the divisions. It's and they were all, each division or regiment, they were all built differently, because you saw how the cap, you're very familiar with how those are built and the different troops. It just happened to be that infantry divisions were mostly heavy tanks.
Yeah.
I remember standing at checkpoints and looking down the motor pool. Mine, for the 336, was on the very far end. And, of course, I don't know how it was pretty, but all the motor pools were all one long extended motor pool, so you could stand on our end and look down and see all your other battalions. And the next 2 were infantry. The 3 infantry battalions for the brigade, and then you started getting into nothing but tanks, one right after the other, just tanks, all the way down to the railhead. And that's just how the mission, before we went light infantry in the late 80s, we were just, everybody was mechanized.
Yeah. Now, see, Korea,
Korea had Jeeps, right?
Yeah, Jeeps, but even, Korea, for example, at least in the 80s, both armor battalions were at Camp Casey, which was the main camp for 2ID by then. The Cav, which we only had 1 armored troop, was up at Gary Owen. So they were close to, MSR 1, Highway 1, which was one of the main avenues approach to Seoul, if war broke out. But the Cav was up there. Usually, there were, or at that time too, there was one mechanized infantry battalion up at Camp Howes, right off MSR 1. So, but then the tanks, something to keep in mind for Book 5, by the way, and we could always discuss it later. The armor battalions, and I think we were in that too, the one armor cav troop, but the armor battalions, they had to rotate they kept a company on standby for all the time up at Camp Howes to support on the Freedom Bridge, and so one company was always on there. So, it was at Camp Howes close to the DMZ. And their job, they were basically QRF. Their mission would have been is go straight up to the Imjim God. Of course, the bridge be blown, Freedom Bridge be blown, but their mission was to go up to Imjim God and support everybody along that line of that avenue of approach. And so
in the 60s, and Levi, I think you can confirm this, but from what I'm reading or writing about in the 60s. Is the armor units were part of the DMZ daily security. So you were there in '69. It may have changed by then, but
it
they
changed.
used to not do as many day patrols during the day. We pretty much abandoned the DMZ for patrols. We did our night ambush stuff. When the guys were on the ground, but most of the OPs and the support areas were overlooked areas were abandoned except at night, and they'd roll in the tanks to the 1K fence or whatever you called it, and they had positions all along that area facing the border, and they provided the day security.
Right. Well,
at the DMZ.
Well,
am I correct? Was it that way when you were there, Levi?
No, it was different. We hardly ever see in the tank because we pulled day patrol, night patrol, barriers, and OP guard posts. But we hardly ever see in the armor. We have maybe like 3 days, about two day patrol out from our unit. Then at night we have like two per ambush for at night. But we stayed out there all the time. It's like we have patrols out there 24 hours.
Yeah.
Same way as the barrier fence, everything 24 hours.
You had the same number. You had, if you had 6 patrols working your sector.
Yes.
During the day, you had 6 ambush patrols out there at night. And I believe they had much less during the day. I know for a fact that they left the guard posts and some of the GSR stuff unmanned during the day.
Well, see, when I was there,
66 to 67, because I know
okay.
Part of those 10,000 words talks about how they would roll in armored personnel carriers and tanks. And they, of course, they weren't allowed within the fenced areas.
Right.
But they took up positions along the 1K or wherever they were allowed to be, 50 meters, I can't remember.
Well, see,
and that was they were there strictly so that we had a strong fire support when we had lighter patrols and security during the day out there.
Right. With 69 and 7 Bob, our GP, it's 24 hours. See, if we go out on GPs, we out on GP probably about 45 days before we come down.
Yeah.
But it's 24 hours in my time.
The 60s. The patrols didn't drop to 30 days until, I think, who was the main, it was 2nd ID or 2nd Armored Cavalry.
Yeah, 2nd ID and the other one.
Right.
7 ID.
That's 7 ID. Yes, I was 2nd ID, but if you got on the GPs, you got there for 4 or 5 days.
Yeah.
You know, I know. Then you come back and do some barrier fence and patrols.
I know what it was. When the Sheridans were finally completely, because we talked about this on one of them. Not the Sheridans. The M14s were a piece of junk, and so they sent them to Korea and Germany because they were blowing up and splitting in half in Vietnam. They had the M113, which was the armored personnel carrier, and had the M114, which was the armored reconnaissance carrier.
Right.
That the scouts worked out of.
Right. And I would tell him, Bob, I would tell him, Thomas, when I got there, we fully M16. We didn't have 14s in our units.
No, he was talking about the armored personnel carriers.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
You didn't deal with really mechanized like mech infantry and the Cav. Especially the Cav had the old M114s.
Oh, okay.
Part of the problem is we didn't learn our lesson for World War II. Is they were gasoline engines.
Oh.
Yeah, but the bigger problem is they were built like the 113s to be light so that you could quickly move into an area. But they weren't. They were built too light because, the armor, they would hit a landmine and literally split in half.
Wow.
And so they had too many casualties from them in Vietnam because they were splitting in half every time they hit these things and killing their crew, where a 113, the APC, the other was an ARC. The APC could survive it. It would immobilize it. It might concuss or kill a couple, but it didn't kill the entire crew, where the 114s were just dead death traps. Well, the Army, in their infamous wisdom, pulled them all out of Vietnam and shipped them to Korea and Germany. And you talk about the 45-day tours that you had. I remember this now is the reason they finally went to 30 days, is they were able to add in another unit to the border patrols, and that was the guys that they wouldn't allow them to be anywhere near the border in the 114s. They waited till they were all replaced by, I think it was the Sheridan. Is that what's the?
Well, the Sheridans actually at one point replaced it. Oh my God! See, Korea, they used to rotate tanks all the time because Korea was just tough terrain on vehicles, and I know, I believe the M4885s in like 78, 79, because they had Sheridans in the Cav, I know for sure. You know, maybe not the armored battalions, but I know the Cav, we ended up going to, they had M4885s. Then 83, 84 time frame, they went from M4885s to the M60A3s. And so, but the Sheridans were there up till the late 70s, but the Cav used them, yeah. The Cav had them over there, and you know, people don't realize is when the Sheridan was developed, it was developed as a light tank to re-support the airborne divisions. So, who was it? It used to be the 1st and the 73rd with 82nd was their one armored battalion, because a good friend of mine, God bless his soul, Steve Munoz, spent many years there at 82nd. Never understood that. Guys go there, by the way, go to 82nd Airborne, they can spend 18 years there before they go to an overseas tour. But I know the Airborne had the Sheridans, and that's what they were originally designed for, was just for 82nd. But again, the Sheridans, I think, in Vietnam proved, and I know guys to be on, but prove they weren't much better than the 113s, you know, because they were so light. And they realized the Sheridan was not the vehicle. You know, you had to be ready for the mines over there, just like you do the IEDs. You know, and of course the Army, and that's another one I could harp on. Thinking the damn Humvee was a great vehicle. The Humvee was not much better than a Jeep in my book. I'd rather have a Jeep over a Hummer any day of the week.
Yeah.
So,
but
yeah. And
what I was trying to explain is that when the 114 armored reconnaissance carriers were in Korea, they wouldn't allow the troop that had those in them to be a part of the border rotation, and so the guys were still maintaining the 45-day rotations. And I'm pretty sure it'll come out in this book. That changed once the last of the 114s were pulled from inventory, and I believe it was the Sheridans that replaced them.
It might have been, because I couldn't answer that 100% sure.
Or it may have been a modified 113 with the, but I'm not sure. I'm pretty sure it was the Sheridan. But once they were able to use all the troops within or all the squadrons within help me with here, troops or companies, right?
Mm-hmm.
No,
yeah, troops are company size. Yeah,
okay. Squadrons or battalion.
Squadrons, battalion. Well, see, you got to remember for the longest, it varied on the troops, but, the CAV reorganized so many different times over the years.
Yeah, I'm talking in the 60s.
Yeah.
There was a whole percentage of the 2nd Armored Division that were not allowed to rotate to the border until all the Sheridans got there, and so they had to stay with the 45-day schedule through the early 70s until everybody was up to and had all of the proper armor load. And once they did and were able to add the additional units that were held in reserve to the rotation, then they cut it to 30-day rotations.
Well, the other thing, too, when the 7th ID pulled out in 71 from Korea, Libby Bridge, which would support armor, was turned over to the ROK Army, the Korean Army. And Freedom Bridge would not support the heavy armor, even the 113s, let alone the width of that bridge is so narrow, you wouldn't even dream of getting a tank across. So once we were down to just, our sector was just that one bridge, Freedom Bridge. The only way you could move armor is either you had to get permission from the ROKs to go further east and move across Libby Bridge, or you had to use pontoon bridges to move it. Or with the 113s, I don't know about 114s, I can't answer it. But 113s, like the Sheridan, could swim if you know how to prepare the vehicle to swim it.
Oh, yeah?
I say that laughingly because I see people screw it up. But, but those could swim across as long as the current ain't too crazy, and so there was a difference there. And with the Sheridans, Sheridans, like I said, as we know, were designed to swim. They had those big, they had flotation devices built into that, just like the Bradleys they did, and which, another joke in itself. But the 113s, so they could swim across if need be. But I know after, by the time I got there, battle positions was along the south side for us, along the south side of the Imjin River, the Imjin got. And so that's where the battle positions were.
And you were on 30-day rotations.
Well, see, being the CAV, we were a little different. The CAV and the scouts from the armored battalions and that, we would go up and do strictly, we were patrols. Now, I know our warrant officers in the air CAV would go up and do radar sites, and I couldn't tell you much past that. I just know they did. But, when we went up in the CAV, we just went up there strictly for 30-day rotations to supplement the infantry to run patrols. Because you would have 6 to 8 patrols out at a time. Well, depending, I always joke, Bob, we got, in a way it's serious, we went up, and it always was summer. It seemed like we always get screwed and get stuck going up during the hottest part of summer during monsoon season. But also that's when, as you being infantry, that's when you start doing EIB. So we were constantly up there, us and the scouts, the battalion scouts from the 2 armored battalions would be up there supplementing the infantry to help out in patrols, because a lot of the parts of whatever unit was up there rotated at the time. They were busy with EIB also, because you know better than I do. When the EIB started, that about overrode everything.
Yeah.
But that's how that pretty much worked. You know, we were up there always in the summer, you know, and it just nothing like the sitting out in monsoon weather and sweating your butt off while it's raining. You know, people goes, "How do you sweat when it rains?" I said, "Go to Korea."
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I said, so you know that, and that's when we would go up there. Seriously though, was during the summertime, man. We would just go up strictly do patrols and that, and so.
But they were all on 30-day rotations. You were just filling in for a unit that would have normally been there for 30 days, and I wish I'd already written it, but now that I think about it, but they all were doing 30 days. In fact, now that I think about it, I think it was Bone Steel that implemented or came up with the idea to do it, to rotate them quicker. Was he there?
Was he infantry?
Levi?
Yeah, he was there when I was there, and we were doing 90 days. We three months up and 3 months down.
Yeah, well, see, by the time I got there, Levi, it was, like you said, I believe it was Bone Steel, General Bone Steel.
Yeah, Bone Steel was there.
Commander.
Mm-hmm.
And, but the infantry would go up for 90 days, but the companies, they would rotate who had guard, who had patrols, and so forth. You know, and like I said, with the Cav, though, and I know the scouts were the same way out of the two armor battalions, out of 1st 72nd, 2nd 72nd, so... And I say that straight out. Most of us were 2ID. We used to call them 1st Tank, 2nd Tank, because we knew they were 1st and 72nd, 2nd. Because you only had the one regiment there, but 2 battalions. Right. So we always said 1st Tank, 2nd Tank. And, the scouts would go up in the summertime probably and support it. So, and it always, I think it varied over time. And as veterans know, no matter where you're at, every time you get a new commander in, stuff changes. Everybody's got their own way of doing things.
Oh, yeah.
So, and Go ahead. Go ahead, Tom.
I was just saying the commanders, at all levels, hell, we've seen it with the division commanders, chief of staffs going. We got how many times we see the Army go light and they find out they don't work. They don't understand the concept of having both. It's like, for example, a while back I got into it, and a kid, I was arguing with a kid, he goes, oh, well, they don't need the Abrams anymore. They can put a 105 in a Stryker. And he said Strykers could replace the Abrams. I said, no. Oh, yeah, I said, no. I said, an Abrams head on, you ain't going to stop that thing. A Stryker, it'd be like putting a 105, a main gun on a 113. The Stryker ain't going to be crap to take out. The M1 can take a beating, but the most vulnerable spot on the M1, as we all know, is the rear grille doors. It's the rear of the vehicle. And about the only thing to kill an M1 is either incoming artillery on top of the vehicle or put a main gun round up their rear end. But past that, Stryker could never replace the M1s. No, it can't.
And you're right, though. Every commander that came through, and it didn't matter whether it was at the platoon level all the way up to V Corps or 7th Corps, they all had to make changes to put their imprint on the way things were done. But Bone Steel was different. In fact, I really, really think at some point in the next couple of years I want to do a story on him. Because he was there when you were there, right, Levi?
Yes, he was. Yeah, he was there when I was there.
He saved more soldiers' lives than any other commander in during the Cold War, non-combat, not counting Korean War and the Vietnam War. Okay, and people don't realize that. And I've been able to piece this together from these interviews. And I was wrong about the 45-day to 30-day border rotations. That came towards the end of Bone Steel's tenure in charge of Korea. But he came up with the layered defense plan. And Doug Voss was there when, as you know, Tom, he's one of the guys that helped build the bunkers and that around the barrier fence. And so, because Bone Steel arrived at the beginning of the Second Korean War, or the DMZ conflict, whatever you want to call it. And we were extremely short soldiers in Korea. In fact, Chapter 2 will show you, we talked to a guy who arrived in Korea, and there were just 6 people in the unit. 6 people in the company.
What?
Yeah. And so the North Koreans, as we all know, that's why there was the Second Korean War. We started shipping all of our soldiers and the best supplies to Vietnam. Because 66 was also the largest year of drafts done by the military as they built up their forces in Vietnam. And what happened is they forgot about Korea and Germany, and so all these people are rotating out of their permanent duty assignments at Korea and Germany and going home or going to the war, and they forgot to fill the positions in both of those countries, leaving them very, very vulnerable. And Bone Steel got there, and the North Koreans started their increased efforts to test our resolve and find our weak spots, because they believed that we were short personnel because of Vietnam, but they couldn't prove it. And that's why they became more aggressive during 66 through 69, because they were wanting to find our weak spots so that they could actually invade South Korea and take it over once and for all. Bone Steel got there and saved South Korea, in my opinion, and he saved many, many soldiers' lives by coming up with that barrier program so that we could do 30-day rotations instead of 45, keeping the guys a little bit more fresh and rotating them, you're right, 90 days, but they did a 30-day reactionary and 30-day training and a 30-day patrol. Does that sound right, Levi?
Yeah, we did.
It was 30.
We did.
It was 30-day guard, 30-day QRF, and 30-day patrols, I believe.
What?
When I got there, that's what they were doing.
Well,
I
was different.
You had 3 companies. You remember back then, which was a carryover from the old regimental system. Back then, they still had 3 companies per battalion. Then your 4th company was the gun company.
That's
so
right.
for the men, or for the infantry, I ain't as dumb as I look about infantry, Bob. I'm teasing.
I know. But they couldn't use the gun companies. They couldn't use the gun companies because of problems with the ARC, and they didn't have enough Sheridan. And that was part of the problem because of Vietnam. And then they were just short on people. And so when Levi was there and the guys in the 60s, during the 66 to 69 era, they were doing the 90-day rotations, but they were just doing 45 reaction, 45 patrol. Right, Levi?
Yeah.
Yes, it's around there.
And then Bone Steel, after the barriers were put in place and some of the other things he implemented, was and being able to draw upon the gun crews now, was he cut the patrols times down to 30 days, and they did a 3-cycle system. And I know QF was one, and I thought it was training, but you're right, training would have been conducted during the non-cycle, so it had to have been guard.
Because when they were up there, you would have, different companies, and of course patrols, there were so many patrols, like Mark Heathcote and I were discussing this, because coming from the camps, and I imagine Germany could be the same way too, especially in the smaller camps, but in the military, you pretty much, as enlisted, we associate with our own 24/7. Your comrades in your unit were also your buddies, And so, as a enlisted, half the time we didn't pay attention what, the other units are doing. You're just concerned what happened within your unit. A lot of times, just your company and your platoon, and, the way Korea was, it was like in the Cav, half the time, you got, at one point we had 5 troops, big troops. Well, the 3 air troops were in 2 different camps. We were 30 minutes away from the flagpole for squadrons. So, but yeah, it just, I don't like I said, talking to Mark, I learned a little bit from Mark, more because he had an opportunity, Mark Heathcote, to work also Brigade TOC for a couple of years, the 3rd Brigade TOC in the 80s. And by then, 3rd Brigade was controlled the mission up there for division. So the 3rd Brigade commander was the reporting commander for up there. So everything, whoever was up there, you were basically attached to 3rd Brigade, whoever rotated up there, because everything went through Brigade TOC at Camp House. So, but
so in the book.
Yeah, well, and like again, due to commanders that the missions sometimes change to how the commanders want to do it, and so it always varies. So that's and of course it varied due to different situations. So
it did, but it was still a 90-day rotation, and the gist of it was it went from a 2-cycle to a 3-cycle. There after the war, the second war part. What they did with those 3 cycles changed per commander, but the only variance of that would be the training. And as far as I can tell now, and I'm painting a broad stroke here, there's exceptions to everything, but the only time that 90-day cycle changed from what I'm learning is when a unit was deployed as a larger scaled unit, and those people on border cycle had to deploy for that 30-day training session. Then they would pull in somebody that's just on a 30-day patrol duty, or 30-day guard duty, or 30-day RF. They would bring in another unit just for a month to fill the 3 slots, so that entire squadron could join the division in maneuvers or whatever it was. Because there were some annual, team spirit. If you were tapped with team spirit, sometimes they'd have to pull some of the border guys. So I know there were exceptions, but I still think, because of the changes that Bone Steel implemented, given his time, he arrived there just as the troop levels were dangerously low, the equipment levels were almost non-existent, and the things he implemented and changed saved a lot of lives during the 66, I guess he got there in 67, through 70 or whenever he left, and then beyond, because those changes, the North Koreans didn't stop just because the DMZ conflict ended. It continued on, just not as large a scale. So had he not done some of the things he did, I personally think that we would have seen a lot more casualties on our side from the increased activity by the North, and we may very well have seen an invasion had they been able to prove just how weak our forces were during that time period.
Well, and of course, Doug could probably answer this best anybody, because the barrier fence was finished by late '68, right before Levi got there. And it made a big difference. It's kind of, use an example so people understand. It's a big difference having a yard fence in an open yard if you let your dog out. If you let your dog out, your dog don't know where the boundaries for the most part are, unless you really train them well. But past that, if you get a fence up, the dog is automatically kept within those boundaries. Well, when we put up the fence there, the barrier fence, or I should say fences because there's more than one fence, but you know what, the barrier fence was put up, it slowed down the easy access from north to south. So Granted, the North Koreans would get through the fence at times, but it wasn't open access where they could just easily sneak across anywhere along the DMZ. Now you had it protected. Of course, I forget one, they end up eventually added spotlights, putting lights up on the fence. The South did. And so, to make it even harder. And so,
then think of it like this, too. If that dog that's in your backyard is trained to kill on sight,
yeah,
it could pretty much attack anybody in the neighborhood because there's nothing to stop it or slow it down. So you put the fence up to keep the dog contained, and the only people allowed within inside that fence are those trained to handle killer dogs.
That
would be your DMZ patrol guys. But now that you've got a fence up, you can build positions outside the fence, safely outside the killer dog's perimeter, and now you can put people in there as support in fire positions that are non-combat arms guys. So now you don't have to have all these 11 Bravos and 19 Deltas and 17 Kilos and all these other guys that were limited, and certain MOSs were all that were allowed inside the DMZ. Now you can use guys to rotate jobs inside guard posts and bunkers along the south side of the perimeter fence as an additional defensive barrier. And that gives him more personnel. And Doug helped build and man those positions, and I forget what Doug's MOS is, but
Doug was
he could have done that without bone steel, and I'm convinced it stopped that Second Korean War from being the final Korean War.
Well, I agree, because you think about by the time the barrier fence was finished, Levi's a good example. Not being a fence, Levi. Being a smart aleck as usual. But Levi got there, it was just right after the barrier fence was done. Well, 69's when the DMZ wars, or I'm like you, Bob, whatever you want to call them, the Second Korean War, that's when it died down. And the barrier fence proved to be effective in slowing down the advances of North Korea into the South. And that's what it was, is advances. Because now it made it went from being easy advance to infiltrations. Because now they had to find the ways to infiltrate into the South because of when the fences went up. And trust me, they still do. They still would. But there wasn't the open, easy act. It's like a dog. You can put the fence up, pretty much contain a dog. But as my beagle would do, I had the one dog a few years back. She would dig underneath the fence. Oh, by the way, North Koreans would do that too. Were found that period in the 70s where they were digging underneath the fence into the South. And so,
if you've got a system of bunkers in place, you have a better chance of catching the dog spending time in that one spot and you realize that he's digging than you would. It's just, I just think he deserves a lot of credit for preventing the South from falling and saving, because the casualties were at their highest in 68 in Korea for the non-combat, the non-war, and I think it could have stayed at those levels or escalated had Bone still not did the layered defense. Which this is a good segue to back to where we started, if I may be so bold, and that's Book 5. And here's what I'm thinking, guys, and your listeners will be the first to hear this. It's taken me a little bit longer to write this series than books in the past, and I'm quite honestly, I wished I was able to focus on it every day, but I can't. My wife's, as you guys know, has been diagnosed with dementia. Diagnosis came last fall, and unfortunately the condition is progressing faster than I care to
Right.
acknowledge. And so my number one priority will always be family.
Oh, yes.
And so I quit and spend time with her, and I would give up the project completely if it meant if I had to, but it doesn't. So that's I want you to know why it's not progressing as quickly, but it is progressing. But
well, you're still gaining people, which adds to the book too. Because at one point, not too long ago, you already had 15, then you're 18. Now you looks like you might have up to 20. So it keeps growing, and of course that slows your progress too, Bob. Because now you got to change directions. Okay, how am I going to do this now?
Yeah,
so, I mean
that's right.
That's easy to read in and see. You got to do that, and because. But yeah, and that's great that people are stepping up to want to do it because
they are.
It's
the process. As you know, I interviewed for both books up front, so I'm way ahead of where I would have been had I not done that. I interviewed Wade Thompson last week.
Good. You got Wade in there. Wade's a good.
Yeah, and I've got, like I said, a few more that have contacted me that I should have already talked to by now, but circumstances just haven't allowed it. Writing the book isn't just a matter of doing the interviews. I've gained a ton of knowledge doing book 3. Oh, pardon me, one second. Regular interviews. They down for another hour or so. And I'll get you 10 o'clock. That's next one. I'm sorry. You can edit that out, I hope.
Okay, yeah, no problem.
So once I get the interviews, half the guys send me notes, which helps tremendously. And so I have to, once I sit down, I start writing their chapter, I have to get it sequential order. And when you're talking about 10,000 words for one chapter, what that translates to about 20-something pages in the book. So I'm constantly having to, I'll read something, because my notes are in chronological order, but then when I try to implement their notes, it takes more time because I have to go back and get in the proper order. And then if I come up against some cool stuff that I could branch out some more Cold War information, that's when I do my research and put my footnotes in to teach people some of the history. And so it's a process. And then, of course, I mentioned she takes a lot more of my time now to help.
Oh, yeah.
So I have to stop. But at any rate, the book, this is what I'm thinking of doing. And this is what it's going to, I'm thinking to make it 2 parts if it continues to be as big as it's looking. And I'm thinking about making book 5, We Were Soldiers 2, book 5 would be the DMZ conflict / Second Korean War, and just doing the guys that served between 66 and 69. I believe I would be the final chapter. No.
All right.
Larry DeMar Sr. would be the final.
Hey, you know what? That might not be a bad idea to explain doing one just on the DMZ wars, because I know you can find a little bit. As I said, a little bit of information about the DMZ wars, and most of that's is non-book related. I know there's a few other books out there in the DMZ, but still, the DMZ wars is really still to this day unknown. And you know what? 30 years ago, Bob, you said DMZ wars to me. I looked at you like, what the hell are you talking about? I'm getting naturally a little, and even you would have said that back in the 80s when we served. If somebody mentioned DMZ wars to you, what would you look done, Bob? You give them a funny look like, what the hell are you talking about?
Second Korean War, what are you...
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I was from by New Korea, but the DMZ wars, back then, even Sermon Korea said DMZ wars. It's like, and of course, I've seen guys back in the 80s while I was in, and to this day, once in a while, you still see it, guys tell fables. Like, I had a guy that served in Korea. He served with the Cav in 96, 97 time period, 98. And I won't mention his name, and I know it still, but he one day, a couple of years ago, we got into it, and he goes, oh, yeah, I was up before some Cav, by then it was Camp Pelham when the Cav moved there. He goes, yeah, we were up in the DMZ. We got in a firefight with the North Koreans with the Bradleys. I'm thinking, no. First of all, I was over there. I would have known that. Second of all, if you got into a firefight, you fired that 25 millimeter, it become a major incident then, not minor.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah. But no, I knew that didn't happen. You would have had to gone through rock positions to have a firefight with the North. Because by then we already turned the mission over. So that's what I mean fabled. But,
yeah.
So you do, and of course I've seen fables come off the borders too, if you know what I'm saying, over out of Europe. Guys made it sound like they attacked the Stalingrad.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I can imagine.
I know from the interviews I've conducted, let's see, we talked about this last time, it hasn't changed, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I have 7 veterans that served during the DMZ conflict. And I think that's what I'm going to lead with that, and then and sub it with the Second Korean War. I'm afraid people see the Second Korean War as the subtitle. They're going to think it's a fiction. Because they don't even know about the Cold War, so how the heck do we expect them, like you and I to know? So,
or understand what it means.
It'll be the DMZ conflict. Any rate. But I've got 10,000 words already, and here's why the word becomes an issue when you're writing this type of book. Because it goes back to me wanting it to be affordable so that the veterans out there can buy it and that non-veterans will give it a chance. I could have charged $17.99 for the paperbacks and made great money, and
sold it third.
I felt guilty doing that because that's not what this series is about. I honestly did price this with the intent of spreading the word and not getting rich or even getting a strong secondary income off of it. And I don't want to break that bubble and have to charge anything higher than I am. Amazon allows 2 different price breaks when you write and publish. If you go with the 70% royalty rate,
okay.
Your book has to be priced at a minimum of $2.99, which, as I've been very open about, that means I make about $1.68 off of each digital book I sell. And I have priced it at, I want to make something to help me offset my cost marketing and promoting it.
Oh, yeah. You got to.
Things I do. So, I mean, I don't want to be doing it, give them away, and then paying for all this out of pocket and end up in poverty. So, I'm at the very bottom price that I can be at $2.99. And the paperback is even more so because the cost to print, the average book is 55,000 words. The cost to print that, the Create Spaces runs about $3.20 a book. So you think, well, he's charging $10. That means he's making $6.80. I wish. Amazon charges me another $3-4 for being the outlet for my paperbacks, our paperbacks. And so I make about the same off the paperbacks. At $9.99, I'm able to make about $1.68 to $1.92 or something like that. Paperbacks have more to do, are more affected by word count, page count. So book 2, which was 65,000 words, I'd make just like $1.20 something off of. This book that's out now, book 4 was the smallest of all of them, at 50,000 words. I make almost $1.90 something. So the whole point is, if this book gets too thick, I have to charge more, and then it defeats everything I think we're trying to do. That's why I try to keep these books where they're at. It's just the perfect place. Wouldn't you agree?
I agree.
Yeah.
I mean, did I lose you there? Or,
Oh no, I know how it goes. Right.
I'm trying to keep the price where it's at because I want veterans to be able to read it first and foremost. It's our story. And I want you guys that are in it to be able to have your families and friends buy it because you're in it. But I don't want them to feel like, well, Levi's got a chapter in this book, and he's my nephew. I got to buy a copy of it. That thing costs $20, so you know that I don't want you to have to. If you want to spread the word to your friends and family, them to feel like they're being gouged either. And when I promote it, I want new readers to come on board. And $10 for a paperback of this size is a good price.
Right.
Especially if you're trying to entice them by, because a lot of these guys are buying people are buying the whole series now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And the more books you got out there, the bigger the series is naturally going to grow. It's a growing series that people don't realize
absolutely.
yet. It's a growing series, and so,
And there are some old school folks like myself that prefer a paperback, and so I do sell. Yeah, it's one of us older guys who do, but digital sales are probably 4 to 1. The paperback. And just so you know, the best month ever I've had was 300 books combined, digital and paperback. So it's never set the world on fire. This is baby steps we're doing here.
Okay.
So the whole reason for this ramble is there's a method to my madness is I'm trying to keep these books affordable. And if this thing gets up to the size of a novel, where it's got 90,000 to 100,000 words, a lot of us older Cold War vets, we're all getting, it ended in 91, so most of us are in our 50s, 60s, or 70s, right?
Right.
That served after Korea and up until the wall fell. So most of us are on fixed income, and so to be able to spend $10 on, that's another reason you're seeing people just buying books related to where they serve, is because they want the paperback and they can't afford $40 for all 4 of them plus shipping. So the digitals are selling 4 to 1, and you can get the whole series for almost the same price as one paperback. So that $2.99 is really key to me. And it is affected by page count too, but not significantly as the paperback. So after all that, I see where I'm at, and I think dividing this into 2 parts is the way to go. I think the DMZ conflict will come. I can write it and even add a couple more people if I have to, and still come in at 60,000 plus words. Which to a good reader, that you can read it in 2 days. To a slow reader, they're the perfect size to non-readers.
Well, hey Bob, I was going to say, I've seen, of course, we've all seen a list, and I've already talked about different ways or different names to the 66, 69 time. But, I was going to say, I know you say conflict, but I always like, who I've seen is like the DMZ War, 66 to 69. Because, that's really what it became. Of course, that's like me and Doug Voss doing the videos, is trying to bring the story out through the whole, and of course, when we do the videos, we're trying to tell the whole time period up there. And Doug, some once in a while, throws in even more modern stuff with the Rock Army. But, is trying to tell a story. Of course, as we know, the most active time was the late 60s. And
historians are calling it those two names. If you
the DMC
type in the Second Korean War on Google, it will come up with the years. They match up no matter what you call it, but the only two names you find referencing the 66 to 69 is the DMZ conflict and the Second Korean War. And to be quite honest, the DMZ conflict is more common. I have found that on more searches than the Second Korean War. So that's why I'm sticking to that, because if people want to question the title, they Google it, they're going to see that there was a Second Korean War. It was called the DMZ conflict. So that's why I like the DMZ wars better, because it does. You're right. That's what it was.
The sound. But technically, if you take a, I'm sorry, Bob, but to take a step back, technically, we are still at war with North Korea. A treaty was never signed. July 27, 1953, an armistice was signed. As I say it, the armistice was signed to stop the major fighting, because as we know, and many of us experienced, the minor fighting continues on. And of course, it's now's like I laugh. I see damn civilians. Something happens to Creole. It's like not the most recent one with two young Korean soldiers. One lost one leg, the other one lost two. But about 2 years ago, when something happened, people go, "Oh, we're going to war with North Korea," and I look at them like, "What dope are you smoking?" Well, what do you mean? This happened. I said, "This is minor compared to other stuff that's happened in the past." I said, "This is nothing new." I said, "Y'all just finally realize that we're in Korea and what's going on?" I said, "This has been going on since 1953. This is nothing new. 64 years now since the armistice signed. Incidents happen there. But even incidents, a lot of incidents people don't know or realize or heard or forgotten happened in Germany, too, or I should say, happening back then with the Eastern Bloc countries. And, aircraft were fired on. People were fired on for different reasons, especially if the aircraft, we're on the wrong side of the fence.
Yeah, and both of those things get covered very, very well. I covered, Harold was quoted in the last book with, I think it was Harold, I know it was Harold, with the best quote about the comparison of the two, and that is, in Korea, you couldn't see your enemy, but you knew they were there, and you never knew when they were going to.
I think there was Harold.
Yeah, that's what I thought. And Germany, you saw your enemy every day. You knew what you were up against. You went to work. You went on your patrol or in your OP or wherever your position was in Germany. Mine was an hour from the border. We got up every morning and we knew exactly where our enemy was at. We knew exactly what to expect if they showed any sign of aggression. So even though we knew that, and this is another quote from Harold, he's really an intelligent man.
Very articulate.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. And I quote him all the time, but he had said that we all knew that it wasn't a matter of would the Russian Soviets attack, but when. And that was the mentality over there. So we knew they were coming. We knew who they were. The border guys could see them. And yet the Korean was just the opposite. You had no idea what to expect. You knew who your enemy was, but you couldn't see him. And that'll come out in book 5 because somebody, who was it? I think it was Wade Thompson, chapter 2. In his interview, in his chapter, we'll talk about guys that they used to rotate them out of their tours from Vietnam to Korea and Germany, mostly to Korea for the last part of their enlistment before sending them home. More commonly, they would send them, if they were hurt, to Japan, the hospital in Japan, to heal and be treated, and then they go to Korea to finish out their term. And many of those guys would re-enlist and go to Vietnam, and they would all say the same thing. At least in Vietnam, you knew what you were fighting. You knew you went out on patrols. You were ready for them. You knew from your mission reports where they were at and what to expect most of the time. And Korea just scared the bejesus out of them because they didn't.
Oh yeah.
And he was there from 67 to 68, so he's referencing people he ran into that were there during that intensified contact, and that these guys were choosing Vietnam over Korea because at least they could see. And see, it's the unknown that's the terrifying part of what the overseas guys went through during the Cold War. I don't care where you were at, Germany, Italy, any of the overseas bases during the Cold War, you didn't know. That unknown's what gave a lot of people PTSD that they'll never be able to claim. In Korea you can, because you're living in a bubble that could be burst any day. And anyways, that comes out very well in book 5, and then it's about the armistice. It comes out. I explain it pretty good in the first chapter, which is one of the reasons his chapter is so huge. Is I've got to lay a little bit of groundwork. I try not to retell everything that's in book 3, because people want to know, that information. They should read book 3. But certain things I have to state again in this book so that it's a standalone book. And the armistice agreement is one, and that how it was signed instead of a typical peace treaty where everybody agrees upon the terms and the war ends. Korea basically is under a ceasefire agreement that the North Koreans break all the time. So I got that covered, Tom. They're very good points, and people need to understand the armistice agreement and the difference between that and how wars normally end.
Well, yeah.
So you guys think?
Oh, go ahead.
You guys think the 2 books is a good idea?
Yes, I do.
You see a problem with it?
Well, I don't see a problem. I think if you do a separate one on the 66 to 69 time period, it highlights that, and it needs to be highlighted because that was the most dangerous, or I won't say most dangerous, but the most active time along the DMZ after the armistice was signed. And, it was the hazards because the casualty counts, the incidents that constantly happen. Come on, North Koreans blowing up a barracks with American GIs in it. And so, too, the other thing I know I've discussed with others, if you look back on it, too, during that time, after we were involved in Vietnam, the communists, considering how many, they're all interlinked, the communists, my God, think about it, especially with the Chinese who were back in the the Viet Cong, the North Vietnamese during Vietnam, were also back in the North Koreans.
Mm-hmm.
So just think how you would stretch our American resources if you started a second war front. If we had to fight a war in Korea and Vietnam, then you would be stretching our manpower, our equipment. We were already stretching it. Just think if you had to fight a major war in Korea on top of fighting a major war in Vietnam. We were not ready to do that. We were not ready to go to Vietnam when we went in 65.
That's right.
And to be able to fight a second front, and again, I don't know if we could turn around and do like we do in World War II. But World War II, we had time to actually develop. People don't give FDR some of the credit he deserves. You know, they were already starting to beef up the military long before the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor.
Yeah.
But FDR saw what was coming. It was just a matter of reason why, you know, how do we get the U.S. involved and make the people happy? Japanese managed to do that for us at that time. You know, made it easier. But yeah, you know, a lot of us look at it as the 66, 69 time period was also a second front, and it would have strained our resources to have two major fronts. And so that's what a lot of us believe also happened. Because think about it, the North Koreans didn't really get active till, boom, we're, like you said, you know, in Vietnam. Because when we started deploying in Vietnam in 65, so, and...
well, and the biggest year of the draft, as I mentioned, was in 66. But the other thing that people don't realize is, I know the Pueblo was taken, the surveillance ship, in 68, I think.
Uh-huh.
And I think the Blue House incident was the same time period. It happened during that second conflict. I don't remember the dates offhand. But it also, the Soviets and the Chinese have always been influential in North Korea. We all know that served, especially in those of us familiar with the Korean information. But what a lot of people don't know is that the North Koreans have always been crazy, and the Pueblo incident was done against the Soviets were the ones, and the Chinese pushing the North Koreans to probe our defenses. They knew we were heavily committed to the Vietnam War, and the Soviets particularly thought that there was an opportunity to take South Korea while we were committed to the fiasco in Vietnam. And so they were pushing the buttons and calling and making and convincing arguments to get them to do all that. But the lunatics took the Pueblo against the advice of the Soviets and the Chinese, and it actually caused the Soviets to kind of back down their influence in later years because of the Pueblo incident. And a lot of people don't know that's when the Chinese became the major backer for North Korea. The Soviets still used them and supplied them and trained them, but they weren't the influence of them like the Chinese were. It's just, I got enough stuff to do both, and book 6 would become the one that book 5 would have been. It'll be the inside the DMZ, the most fortified border in the world, and I've got 10, 11, I think, people for that. But I've got, Alan Bloom did 3 tours. Thomas, you did 2 during the Cold War. And so there are enough from my interviews in that I really do think it's not, instead of having one 70 to 80,000 page book, it'll be very easy to have 2 55 to 60,000 page word books by doing it this way. And the other thing that I don't think just is what?
I was going to say, Bob, excuse me, I'm coughing on you when you're trying to talk and I can't hear you either. Well, I was going to say, and that opens up the opportunity for a few more people to step up if they want.
Yeah, it does, especially in I really would like to get some people more from the 70s, because I don't have anybody there for the Axe Tree incident.
We could talk later. I might have one for you.
And I've got a guy that I haven't interviewed yet that actually served in the at the peace table.
Okay.
He was one of the guards there in that building, and I think that's a great perspective to add to the DMZ story because we've never included anybody that was actually in, how do you pronounce it, Pauline? What was the village called where the UN was at? Yeah.
Parmesan.
We never had any, yeah. Parmesan.
Parmesan. Sorry.
It's a great addition to have that. And the other thing that I like is I think there are two critical books to this series that will show the severe circumstances of the Cold War that people just didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
That Second Korean War, that book will be the best book ever written as far as covering a broad time period inside the DMZ, and I think that the second portion of that book now will be a great complement to that. And then the following book was the 1983, The Brink of Nuclear War, will show just how close our military buildup, the things that we were doing, put us, that the Soviets were actually, as the old saying goes, finger on the button. They were ready to launch a preemptive strike at the end of 1983 based upon all the increased training that we were doing. Many people think Able Archer made them panic and get to that frenzied state, but there were actually a lot of events. And Korea actually plays a part in that story too, because they shot down that Korean passenger plane.
Oh, 1983. Yeah.
Yeah. And that was just nervous.
Korean Airlines.
Yeah. That's because they were so nervous about us launching a nuclear attack on them that year that they hit the button before they were able to identify it as a passenger plane. That's exactly what happened.
Yeah.
But we had two exercises with the Pacific. Yeah. You see, that shows just how nervous they were. And then they implemented Operation Ryan in '81. When Reagan was inaugurated, in March of '81, they implemented this thing that was the largest spy campaign of the entire Soviet era, because they were convinced that we were going to strike, attack, and they wanted to get enough intel together to be able to launch this preemptive strike when they saw enough indicators that we were preparing to launch one ourselves. And so they started getting nervous in March of '81, and then we had the first Able Archer was in '81. We had the Reforgers '81, 2, and 3, which were very big in Germany. Then Able Archer '83, we had 81 and '83, the Pacific Fleet was doing war games along the Soviet border in areas that we had never been into since the 1950s. Our aircraft were doing low-altitude flights inland to see how far they could get before the Soviet towers picked them up. And so we were doing a lot of training exercises, unaware that everything we were doing was causing them to think we were preparing for an attack. So that book and the DMZ books I'm working on now, those are going to be the books that I think tell more about the real Cold War that anybody's ever written, I think.
Yeah, excuse me. Threw a yawn in there. No, but I think back to being a second book, just on the 66-69 time period, I think is, because that was the most proactive time, and there, or the heaviest, proactive or the heaviest time. I mean, the North Koreans were never silent, but the barrier fence, as, common sense can tell you, slowed that down quite a bit.
Oh, yeah.
And it's, I agree, because General Bonesteel's defense plan, when it went in effect, it's what slowed him down. He saw a need for it, because if he didn't, I agree. If you look back in history, as the old saying goes, if Bonesteel defense wasn't drawn up, we would have been heavily, we could have been really in a major world war over there in the Asia then.
Yeah.
I mean, think about it. It would have gotten really dangerous, really bad. We gotten quick, because North Korea opened up, no telling what was going to open up to, or the Korean Peninsula if it opened up. The Japanese would have probably been involved, and it goes on and on. And so, and of course you had other, people forget the UN forces are still complemented. Granted, you don't have, they may not have whole regiments up there or battalions up in the DMZ like we did, but you still had representatives there in the UN and still do to this day over there. You got Australians, you got Filipinos who represent the UN there on the DMZ, and they're still there, part of the UN force or JSA, and so, you got other countries that are still involved in that. So, you could, if Bone Steel didn't do what he did, we could have really gone into a third World War, and it could have got dangerous quick. Not just conflict in those two countries, but a major world war.
He's on the bottom of my list. I think.
What's that?
He's on the bottom of my list of things I want to include in this because I think he was a key player in the future of the Cold War. But let's.
Oh, I agree.
We're running. What do we got? About 10 minutes here, 15 minutes counting the.
Yeah, we got about 15 minutes.
Okay. I want to go back to something you said earlier, Tom. It's going to be covered in the DMZ conflict, and you had talked about how close you become with the guys you served with in these situations. My company in Germany, just like my company in Fort Knox, and then it's the 25th Infantry Division, they're family. When you're in a situation like we were in Germany and in Korea, you become even tighter of a family. People don't realize just how hard it was to be in the military during the Cold War. Nothing like it is now. I mean, I don't want to call it a fancy military, but cell phones have made everybody reporters, and everything's got to be politically correct.
Oh yeah.
When we went through, they could say, do whatever they wanted, and they trained the crap out of us. I mean, that Cold War video I made 2 years ago, 40% of Cold War veterans are disabled.
Oh yeah, that's true.
And 40% of Cold War veterans were not in harm's way every day. Even the DMZ guys don't add up to 40% of all Cold War veterans. That figure tells me, and every people should read into this, that means that we were training so hard that 40% of the people are now on disability because of what we went through. The running, the marching, the full combat stuff. You guys did it. When you weren't on patrol, I guarantee you did some mountain marching.
Oh, yeah.
Hey, Bob, we used to have mostly road marches besides their normal training.
Yeah,
we had
we all
road
did.
marches. I mean, and I mean road march, not going out with vehicles or road marching. We're talking on foot.
Oh, yeah.
And everybody had to do it in Korea. It didn't matter if you're the ramp, but a rear echelon, or it didn't matter what your MOS was. Everybody had to do mandatory road marches. So you had to
were a front line
20 mile walk.
Yep.
Up and down the mountain.
You were a frontline unit. A unit that would find themselves on a front line in Korea or in Germany or anywhere in Southeast Asia. Anybody that was in a unit that could be deployed to the front line if something broke out with the Soviets humped, because you would become a ground pounder at some point in the battle with the Soviet or the communists, because your vehicles aren't going to work in close battle. And so they took it serious. And so when you go through those experiences together, it bonds you more. I was closer with the guys in my platoon and then my company in Germany than I was anywhere else. And the 20th Infantry Division, I spent a year and a half as the operations NCO, and I was more involved with every platoon and every company than I ever was anywhere else. But it still didn't match the tightness I had with the unit in Germany. And there's a great story in Chapter 1 that Wayne Perkins told me about, that gunfire in 66 and 67, just like when you were there, Levi,
Okay.
was almost a nightly thing.
Right.
You may not have been involved in gunfights the entire year that you were there, or you may have been in a few. Some guys saw them very regularly, but almost every night in your bunker or in your hooch back at border camp, you heard gunfire going off on the border.
Oh, yeah.
Or food gas, as Doug Voss says.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
it wasn't totally uncommon to have food gas go off. You know, and so food gas,
Yeah,
for people that don't know, is napalm. It just, instead of being dropped, it's being fired off like a claymore.
Yeah, and mixed it with diesel, and all the bunkers along that support fence, barrier fence, had, I think he said every other one had the food gas barrels.
Right.
But, I'm sorry, it wasn't Wayne, it was Wade Thompson, Chapter 2, that had said, told me this, and he was there in 67, 68. At any rate, he would, when he was in base camp, with his platoon, laying in bed in his hooch, you kind of got used to the pop, and then you didn't stop and panic or wonder what was going on, because that pop happened all the time. A couple rounds being fired here,
Mm-hmm.
a couple rounds there. Sometimes you'd hear more pop, and then the AKs made their own distinctive sound, and the M14s, and you could tell somebody was in a gunfight. Didn't know where, but again, it didn't bother you. You just kind of stopped your conversation and you went back to it while you're laying in your bunk visiting. That you'd hear machine guns going off, you'd hear a hand grenade here or there, or the food gas barrel being dropped. They had the quad 50 cal, which I've never seen or heard, but he said it was an awesome thing that when you heard one of those things go off, everybody stopped and listened just because it was cool to hear the things being fired.
The 50 or something
50
there.
cows together. But again, but it was also, every now and then you'd be laying and you'd hear some serious firefights going on. Just constant firing and whistling and rumbling of rounds going overhead.
Think about a nighttime. Of course, that time, even what little night vision equipment they had was very primitive compared to what we even had in the 80s, Bob. Although I would say the PBS-7s were pretty primitive. But, night vision goggles. So, guys, I'm sure even the North Koreans agree, whether they're making intrusions or, both sides, I'm sure, will open up fire because, when it's night, things, what's the saying about the dark, you see things are not there or whatever, people get, because you can't see anything, tensions are, for an individual, a human reaction is to be paranoid because all of a sudden you hear a sound, what the hell was that? What was that? And of course, I could tell you, here's a good one, it was like Mark was someone, one of his patrols, Mark Heathco, their guys. He said one of his guys, because wild animals run loose in the DMZ. It's a game protective area, game conservation area.
Yeah.
But he said one of his guys was yelling. They were on an ambush patrol, night ambush, and Mark goes. One of his guys started yelling, "They got me! They got me!" And Mark heard some of the bushes. Well, they ended up opening fire. Well, come to find out it was a wild boar they shot.
Yeah, we used to have that all the time too, Tom. A trip flare go off, you know what I mean? And we shoot right into that spot right there.
Well, Wayne Perkins' first night in the DMZ, he was on the very extreme east side, I think, the very last position. Next to him was where the Rock Army picked up. And you mentioned the night. Well, first off, his first night there, he was on break and sleeping while his partner was on the IR searchlight, which I'll explain in a minute. But he heard rounds exploding and came flying out from a dead sleep and started, he was disoriented and terrified because he heard these rounds exploding a couple hundred meters in front of him. And he was just certain that they were under attack because the first night there, he heard all the war stories driving in. And so
it gets scary.
Before he grabbed his rifle, the guy that was there he was relieving the Second Infantry Division, and the guy told him that that's friendly fire, and explained to him that there was what they call it. They were marking points in front of them but that rounds were actually being fired from behind them. And he actually explained to him how you could see light travels faster than sound, so you could actually see the round explode first, then you'd hear the round explode, and then after that you'd actually hear the sound like a freight train going overhead as the round traveled. So it's backwards from the impact. But
right.
Had this guy not caught Wayne before he grabbed his rifle, he could have found himself firing down in front of him where there was a 5-man crew in a foxhole. And a little further down that was he was firing it, blindly at something that he imagined, and it was fire. So, the mind does stir up things even when it's not just there.
I think we just lost Thomas too. We just lost Thomas, and hold on. Yeah, hold on 1 second. Let me stall this right quick. Hold on.
Okay.
Hold on. Now.
But we were talking about how it didn't matter if it was your first night or what night in the DMZ. At night, your imagination does tend to see and create things that aren't there. And
hey Bob, I can tell you.
But we're running out of time, Tom.
Oh yeah, I know. But a friend of mine, David Howard, he was 83. He was with Sport Platoon, was second tank at the time, and he took the scouts up for the DMZ. But they asked him when to go out on the mission, and he said when he went out on the first mission, especially the night ambush, he said it scared the living daylights out of him because he knew what was going on. And when they asked him if he wanted to go on the second one, he said, "No, I got to get back to Camp Casey."
Yeah, it was. It's very dark. A lot of that DMZ was in valleys and down, at least on the east side, I think, was in areas that were surrounded by mountains.
It was very dark.
So I'm sure it got very dark down there.
Very, very dark.
I was to wrap up real quickly here for you.
Okay.
The Wade Thompson story when they were laying in the barracks at night. They're in their hoods, so they're in the safety of camp. And so hearing this fire and the grenades and the occasional stuff just became kind of routine. And the only time you took notice is when the quad 50 cals were going off because they sounded so cool, and then you went back to your conversation. But when you heard an actual battle going on and firing for a prolonged time, that you took notice in your hooch, and he explained how what they instantly started talking about, okay, who's in what sector in our company, and they knew within their company where the platoons were at and what companies were covering what sectors, and could tell the direction of the gunfire, and they always wanted to make sure it wasn't one of their guys in their company that they were hearing the fire from before they would call them and go back to their conversation. So that kind of shows this esprit de corps that we were talking about earlier, that when you heard serious enough fire out there, even when you weren't on the DMZ yourself but were off, your first instinct was, okay, which of our guys are out there and where are they at tonight? And you were worried about that fire might be one of your own guys. So there are a lot of really good stories that are going to come out in this book 5. I never talked to any of the guys about direct contact that they had. I don't want to know or publish any casualties that they caused, because that's a personal thing.
Oh, yeah.
And that's not what these books are about. And I don't feel comfortable with those stories. But even without that, these guys like you, Levi, all contribute different perspectives of the DMZ during that 3-year conflict. And it's going to be a really, really good book.
I can't wait.
Lastly, let me wrap up if I got a minute.
We got about 30 seconds.
The Ghostwalker book is a go. I've got enough to write it. There are enough people that served that can confirm that they heard of them, they just never saw them. I've got 2 guys interviewed that are enough for me to be convinced that it's real.
Oh, yeah.
So there will be another book on the DMZ in the very near future that talks about these Ghostwalkers that did some of the cross-the-border stuff that nobody talks about. So there's some really good books in the pipeline. That and the Nuclear War in 1983, all of that in the DMZ books will be out this year. And they're all available on Amazon and every other digital. You get paperbacks at Amazon and you get them at Barnes & Noble's website. Otherwise, the digital copies are available everywhere. Okay. That's all I got.
All right.
Okay. And I know we're running on time. We've been on for 2 hours, and it goes quick. It always goes quick.
It sure does.
Oh, yeah.
It sure does. Bob, we appreciate having you back on and updating us.
As always.
And I know tentatively we've been hoping July to see one or maybe, see one of the books, but I think I would hope the listeners understand the more research you do, the longer it's going to take. And the more you find out, with the amount of people you got in this, it's really opened it up to be more. But back to, I appreciate having on the show. I hope everybody listens in and learns a lot. And for the listeners who have not gotten the book, get the books, get the series. Again, you can get the digital and or paper copies. And by the way, like I said, Bob, like you, I'm old-fashioned. I like a paperback book. But,
me too.
It's so much easier to lay down on the couch and hold a book than a Kindle or, whatever, tablet or phone. But that's me personally. But thanks for coming on, and, you're always welcome back as we get going along further. We'll probably have you back on because you got more books in this series to discuss. But thanks again, and everybody have a good night. Levi?
Yes, I would like to thank everyone here for listening to the Veteran Special with Bob Kern. And it's been a great 2 hours. So until next week, this has been host Levi Miller and co-host Thomas Lucan and author Bob Kern. So good night, everyone.